people do not leave their jobs for jobs. They leave their jobs because of their managers and bosses.
Yeah. Well, that's why I left my last job. I mean, I actually left jobs. I mean, I don't know how else to put it, but I had been struggling with adapting my Asperger's brain to the chaos of corporate America for many years. And I just realized that, there was a point when I realized I personally was going to be happier in an environment where I didn't have colleagues, Benoit, because my brain is one that neurologically, it doesn't do well with much stress at all. Ask my wife. And so the best way for me to operate in daily life is to architect some universe where there's minimal social interaction, not a lot of stress. And corporate America is unbelievably stressful psychologically. You have collegial stress. It's coming vertically and horizontally. Then in a professional service environment, which is how I make money, you got clients, right? So for me, that was just too much. It took me a long time to get that mature. Like, I should just work for myself.
We may or may not go into your reasons for departing academia, speaking of toxic stress at work. And as you and I know, academia is the graveyard where a lot of dreams go to die because of tremendous ego, to say the least. But can you first share what is Asperger's syndrome? Because there's a lot of misinformation. So what is that? And how did that allow you to peep behind the curtain of this hidden individualism in America?
So being a clinician, this is my best definition, mode of neurodivergence in which, an adult has problems reading social cues in the moment and has a problem filtering themselves. They tend to be too honest. They tend to lack the ability to tell white social lies in complex social situations, which is pretty necessary. And for me, it presents as sometimes I just get, and there's a lot of obsessive focus on things that Aspie person's interested in. And that could be a conversation they're having. So like I rant a lot. Though you're not going to let me do it today. I rant a lot. I obsess and fixate. And that could be, it's often in a conversation. So I'm really bad at parties because I won't shut up. Like if I find someone who's interesting to talk to, I lock onto them like with claws. And that drives people nuts. So it also in complex workplaces, people like me, we don't deal with social ambiguity well. That's probably the most important thing. And it connects directly to my book because in a hyper-individualist society, which wants everyone to be super adaptive, super flexible, always changing, always improving, everything's ambiguous. My brain was built for like an Amish world. And I probably, I might stick out there a little bit, but not nearly as much because there would be so little stress, right? So, but when you put a lot of social stress on someone like me, then there will be the meltdown is what they call it, right?
Mm-hmm. Can you contextualize a little bit further what social ambiguity is specific to in a social context?
Not knowing in a conversation whether the person is really on your side or not, because we're so good at smoke screening, fake friendship, and blah, especially in business, to like keep you as a potential ally, right? But we may actually not like you. So not knowing where you stand with people, I think is an epidemic in modern America. It's a country of fake smiles, fake stranger friendship. Who knows what it means? And I just my brain doesn't know what to do with that. It makes me unsettled. Right. Even in the American workplace, unless you're in say top 10% of companies, you're probably going to experience that. I don't know where I fit. I don't know where I stand. Right. A lot of people are annoyed by that, but people with my brain, it literally sends us into panic mode. And that can be resolved by just coming home exhausted every Friday or having full-blown panic attacks, which I have had.
I want to quickly highlight 3 different words. Speaking of, like you said, superficiality and the social ambiguity, since we all are good at putting different masks, smiling, like you talked about in the book, laughing outrageously even for very mild and non-funny jokes for the sake of this business relationship maintenance or whatever you want to call it. I'm thinking about 3 words you just hit me: conversation, dialogue, and discourse. I think those are 3 tiers, and I think people get them confused. I think a lot of people pride themselves for being like a high touch society. I'm very high touch. aka I'm very in person. I love in person conversations. But like you said, James, I think most people, even without awareness, they do a lot of drive by or drop in conversations on the fly in the hallway. Quick nods, small talk, sports, how's the weather, how's your family? Oh, remember the conference last year, which you also alluded to in the book? But then there's dialogue, which is more in depth, and there's discourse, which is what the podcast is about. I think that's the highest level. But why do you think this is an important distinction to make?
Well, I think the key is that in dialogue, you actually have to have empathy for the person you're talking with, because you're switching between listening and then responding. And in a culture like ours, which again, it emphasizes individual sort of pathing in your career and in your social life, right? So that you're architecting your own social network of advantage for yourself and pleasure. We've become, I think, less good at the pausing and listening, right? Which is essential to strong relationship building. And I just happen to be neurologically like, this is what's ironic about the book, is that my brain was built for hyper individualism because I can function on my own, Benoit, dude. I can like literally sit in this office for hours. Just, I don't need to, I don't care if I don't talk to anyone all day till my kids come home. I was built for it in a way, and yet not built for it in another way, which is, I don't even know when I've gone too far. Even a person who can function on their own, they suffer, and I did in my 20s, they suffer the damages of being disconnected, not having strong relationships. People like me are just very slow to recognize that, usually in a very bad sort of crash and burn depression situation. And that's happened to me. So I think, yeah, that's the distinction. Is small talk is nice because it sort of identifies that you're a member of the group, right? You're acknowledging that the colleagues, we're part of the tribe here at work, but it doesn't actually create a relationship. It's sort of like flashing a badge.
You said that you can thrive in hyper-individualistic setting because, like you said, your brain is wired in a certain way. And I'm thinking about the difference between being alone and feeling lonely. Aloneness and loneliness are fundamentally different. I'm extremely content at being alone. I enjoy aloneness. I'm very extroverted. At the same time, I'm comfortable being with myself and my thoughts. I've done a lot of work and a lot of cultivated practices. For you, with your Asperger's syndrome, you're saying that even though you're slow to recognize loneliness, but social isolation and lack of connection still impacts you?
It does, because that's the misunderstanding with people who are like me, is that because we're recognized by the social faux pas we commit. We're rude, we say inappropriate things, and so we're recognized for the negative stuff. Right? And so it seems like we're just basically a-holes sometimes. We get confused for that. And often it's stress related, social inappropriateness that's coming out. And we can manage that. We can work on that problem. And I have. We're not we're not folks who are unable to love or unable to feel. We just don't feel we don't bond as intensely as other people. And that causes problems in relationships, yes. But it's not like we don't have those impulses. We're not. And that's what distinguishes like me from a true like clinical psychopath. As far as I understand the definition, is that they really have no desire to bond with anybody. I do.
Oh, very, very different. Very,
yeah,
very different.
I do. I'm just not very good at it. So it's like a form of incompetence in modern day life, right? And I think what's interesting is if you go back in time, or you go back to or across the world to other societies, social structures, there isn't as much burden for the individual to be that competent, right? Because they can be in a structured setting where very little's asked of them, Benoit. On a family farm before the Civil War, you were asked to do labor. The labor was the same. Every year is the same set of labor tasks. It's not that I don't have to be that skilled to get along with my family. But you compare that to I'm now onboarding a client, know nothing about them. They've paid me a bunch of money up front. There's a stress of delivering good, deliverable for them. don't really know who they are. I have no idea how they're going to react. So I get stressed out every time I onboard a client. I've just learned how to manage it, right? But in another era, I would have just been, just a farm guy. Mm-hmm. It's just not that complicated.
I want to zoom into this because this is pretty important. In the book, you talked about over 51% of Americans, they rely on their partners and spouses for interpersonal issues and crises. But then you also talked about 12% of Americans don't even have a friend.
Yeah.
And I think the definition of the word friend has loosened a lot, just like the word of love has been diluted exponentially in the past decades. I bring this in because I had a conversation with a Christian philosopher last year. And he was talking about this false notion and this fixation and this fallacy, or this heightened pressure to maintain endless amount of friends. You have your best friends, you have your good friends, you have your close friends, you have your acquaintances. And this implied pressure of, oh my goodness, I need to have a bunch of best friends and bunch of good friends amidst paying for bills, working full-time jobs, having family situations, trauma, societal issues. I have to devote all these time to maintain interpersonal bubbles. And he told me that, but Benoit, Jesus, because he's a Christian philosopher and so am I, Jesus only had 12 disciples. Whether you believe he's deity or not, we know he was a historical figure. But if Jesus had 12 disciples and his parents, but 12 people were the closest to his life, Jesus, why do we feel this pressure of maintaining all these extensive network? And I think it's going back to your point. There's so much implied, non-explicit pressures we all live with, and we forget that.
Yeah, I do think that some of the research on some of the discussion on friendship issues may be overstating the case of the problem a little bit in terms of scale, but I don't think it's overstating the case in terms of the quality of the relationships. And the data is not perfect. I looked at most of it for my book, but I think the 12% have no friends at all. I think to me, that's the real, it's obviously not everybody, but it's just so weird. And the reason it's weird, Benoit, is and they tend to be older if you look inside the data set. So, we're not talking about high schoolers per se, but to have no friends in a society where family doesn't do anything for you and you don't know, you're not really interacting with them much. They're not very useful, as I point out. I mean, in terms of your career, finding a mate. I mean, they don't play those roles anymore. We kind of do need friends more now in this kind of society because the friends are the replacement for your family in a traditional society. I mean, it's so obvious. It's right in front of them. So we can definitely argue whether you need 50 or 20 or 10, but my gosh, you need something to replace the complete vacuum of the extended family, which in traditional societies was the primary place that you got everything dealt with. I'm a classic Anglo-Saxon case of that, where I never really knew my aunts and uncles, which is aunts and uncles in most societies are a classic place to get parental age sort of mentoring without the conflict of interest of the parent. It's an iconic place. I had no access to them. So I think we need friends. I think we need more high quality friendships more now than 100 years ago. Absolutely. And the irony is people had both back then.